Hello everyone, welcome back again to my channel. Today I have something very exciting for us to work on, and that's a Moodle LMS on AWS with Docker Compose. Now I know that I have a video where I have demonstrated this, but this is a little bit different because there are certain things that we're going to be doing differently than what we have done before in the previous video that you may have watched on this channel already. Now, recently I had to deploy Moodle LMS for a school for an exam that would accommodate about 200 to 500 users, and of course cost was a very important thing that we had to discuss. All right, so cost was one of those things that we were considering because the number of users were not that much, and it was just something that we're not going to use for a very long time. It was just for testing purposes, and so we needed to find a solution that would fit their budget, and of course ensure that there are no issues as to maybe timeout errors, internet server errors, all those kind of things. And so I had to sit down to think about, okay, what could I do? How could I put this together to ensure that, the 200 to 500 users are able to do their exams without any kind of, network latency and errors and all this kind of stuff. So I came up with this architecture, which I want to share with us today. Now, in this architecture, of course, we wanted to make sure that Moodle LMS is served, securely with HTTPS, not HTTP. And so we needed to find a solution for that. Now, we will have gone with AWS Certificate Manager, but the challenge with that is that Certificate Manager will have to export out the certificate in order to use it with our Nginx reverse proxy. Okay, and unfortunately, the certificate export is visible, but in terms of pricing, it was way beyond the budget. Because if you come here to the AWS Certificate Manager pricing page, if you want to export out your AWS certificate, which is now a feature that is available on the console, the pricing, it's around $15 upon issuance, which means they will issue, you'll be able to get the certificate, and of course be able to export it. You'll have to pay about $15, all right, for that. And then it says here, exportable public certificate per wildcard name, which means you have certificates where you have asterisk dot, the domain name, such that other subdomains can leverage that certificate. It says that it's going to be around $149, and that's way beyond, all right, the budget that we had. So the option we were left with is to go with, Certbot Let's Encrypt, which is cheaper and doesn't cost us, anything. All right. Now, everything that you see here was deployed with Docker Compose, and I'm going to walk us through the project and everything. We're going to do it together. All right. And so every aspect of it, the Moodle LMS, we built the image ourselves. We didn't use the Bitnami image that is available on Docker. We had to build our own, Moodle image by ourselves. And of course, we leveraged the MySQL image as well with version 8.4.5, which I think is one of the latest stable versions available. And then, of course, we leveraged PHP which we can use to log into the database and manage our database. And of course, like I said, the Certbot was used to generate SSL certificates that the Nginx reverse proxy will help us to terminate so that our users can access the platform securely, all right, without any kind of issues. Okay. Now, all the things that you see here, I already put it together in this repository with detailed, README that you can go through to understand, all right, the idea behind the project and every other thing. And of course, so for those who like to go through the README, you can go through it. And then for those who like to watch the video is also going to be made, all right, available. And that's how we're doing this recording anyways. All right, so this is the architecture that we want to work on. And we're going to be leveraging a T3 medium, all right, for this. So even if you have a free tier account, you definitely will be charged, all right, for this, okay? So I just thought to mention that to us, okay? And of course, in order to reduce our cost further, we're not going to be leveraging an ad gateway. We're just basically going to be using the normal VPC. But of course, we're going to do some security group, settings to just ensure security and all of that. Okay, but the idea here is to see how we can leverage Nginx as a container to terminate our SSL, how to generate a SSL certificate with Certbot, even as using the Certbot Docker image, and of course how to tie all of these things together so that we can have a robust Moodle setup. And in addition to that, one of the things that we're also going to be doing is that we're also going to be leveraging, we're also going to be also generating the config.php file that Moodle requires. So which means we won't have to enter our username and password, the database username and database password, on the browser, right? We want auto generate all of that. Since we're leveraging container, we already have the database name, the database username, the password and everything. We already have that. And in addition to that also, we are also going to be leveraging Docker Compose secret to make sure that our Docker Compose, the database password, the root password, those things are tied to the Docker Compose secret instead of using environment variable. So we're going to be using environment variable for things like database name and then database user, but anything that has to do with the password, we're going to be leveraging Docker Compose secret, all right, for that. Okay, so those are the things that we're going to be looking at together practically in this video. So I believe you have an understanding of this architecture and what we intend to achieve, and so let's dive right into the setup so that we can begin what we want to do. Now, first of all, I would like to walk us through the compose file that we're going to be using, the compose file that we're going to be using. Now here I already have my Docker file, which is this one, which I've used to build my Moodle LMS image. I've done that already. All right, and then of course I pushed that to my Docker hub. So we're going to be pulling from Docker hub, and of course this particular Docker file builds your Moodle image for you automatically, leveraging this particular approach. So if you go to the moodle.org and you go to downloads, here you can see obtaining Moodle LMS by Git, and all the instruction that you see here is basically what we've packaged in this Docker image. Okay, we've bundled everything together, all of the extensions and dependencies that Moodle needs to run, everything has been packaged together in this Docker file, which I believe in the previous video that I did earlier, I tried to give us an explanation of that. Okay, so in the compose.yaml file, I built the image already, and of course that's the image we're using. The container names this, and then here I'm using the keyword expose because I do not want my Moodle to be exposed directly or to be accessible directly from the internet. So I'm only exposing it within the Docker Compose network. Okay, because in this case I'm using Nginx as my reverse proxy. So anyone that wants to access my Moodle LMS application, they will have to go via the Nginx, and then Nginx redirects to the Moodle application. So that's why here I'm using expose and not ports, as you might be familiar with already. So expose basically means expose this port, but it's going to be internal within the Docker Compose network. And in order to ensure persistence, we are basically, we have a volume here. And this volume here, it's what you would call a named volume. A named volume, basically, it's a volume that Docker will manage itself. It creates the volume, on the host machine, and then maps that to the location that you specified in your container. So this is what a named, volume. And then here we also have a depends on. A depends on basically means that this particular service is not going to start or run until this particular, service has been started successfully. Is that okay now? So that's the depends on that we have right there. And of course we have some environment variable. All right. Now, by default, Moodle is not, shall I say, environment variable aware. All right. But we are going to make it environment variable aware because we're going to be using this environment variable to construct the config.php file so that we don't have to go through all of those manual setup, and then we just land to the page where we'll have to just accept the terms and then install the Moodle application. So we have about 5 environment variables here. the Moodle database host, the database user, the database name, the password, and then of course the www root, which is the URL, all right, that the Moodle will be accessible on. Now, if you look at the database host, we basically just put the name there. We had coded the name. Of course, we can use a variable for these anyway. So let me just copy this, Ctrl Z. So I'm going to copy this, all right, and then I'm going to use a variable for this. So I'm just going to call that my SQL underscore host. All right, so let's call it that. And I'm going to go to my environment variable here, which contains non-sensitive data. All right, my SQL host, and then we'll say that is equal to this. So that's going to be the host name. All right. Okay. So that's going to be the host name and the user and the database. And then of course, if you look at the Moodle database password, we have what you call underscore file. Now, when you are leveraging Docker Compose secrets, okay, for your password and things like that, the variable on the environment variable name must end with what? Underscore file. So that tells Docker Compose that it's going to be reading the secret from a file. All right. And then there's a particular path in your container that is called a /run/secret, and then the name of the secret, which you must kind of, mount, more like what you would call maybe a bind mount or something. Is that okay now? So that's what you have, but it has to be underscore file. So that tells Docker Compose to read, okay, from that particular file. So here we have /run/secret and then the name of the secret. And of course, this secret has to be created. So if you look at what I have here, I have a folder called secret. And if I expand that, I have two text files, all right, db_password.txt, db_root_password.txt. So inside of this file, it contains, all right, my secret. Okay, we're going to be seeing that by the time we set up our EC2 instance together. Okay. And so that's what you have here. And then, of course, you have the Moodle, all right, www root : and then, of course, this is the URL that the Moodle will be accessible on. And, of course, the secret here, you put a name here because that's what we're referencing, db_password. And you can see here, I have the file. So db_password, the txt doesn't really matter. All right, db_password is what matters right here. Now, all of these environment variables will be useful because from the Entrypoint, .sh that we have here, if you look at the Entrypoint.sh, we want to construct our config.php, all right, and then build that as part of the image, right? That's what we want to do because we don't want to start typing the database name, the database password, and all those kind of things while we're setting up, the Moodle LMS. We want to bypass that stage by, all right, creating the config.php file, all right, beforehand, so that the only thing we're just going to do is just to install the application, and that's all. All right. So here we have a shell script that is part of the Docker file. So if you scroll down here, I already have the Entrypoint script. And of course, when the container starts, right, it's going to basically execute that script and then the Apache will start, all right, almost immediately. Okay, so that's what we have here. So in this Entrypoint script, and of course, I have an explanation of the script also in the README, so you can go there to have an understanding if you're new to, shell scripting. So here we have a variable called Moodle dir, which is basically the path to the HTML folder where you have your Moodle code. And then the config.php is also in the same Moodle dir, all right, and then the Moodle data. So here we say if this particular file, all right, does not exist, then it should echo this saying generating Moodle config.php. So if there's no config.php file available, then it should what? Generate that. Now, our password is not something that we want to add code, and so we are basically leveraging what you call command substitution. So this variable is something that we already have right here. All right, as you can see, we have the variable here, and of course, this is the password, so we have it already. And so if you go back to the entry point, we're basically substituting the value of this variable into this other variable. Okay, so this is command substitution. Is that okay? So whatever it is that this variable holds, all right, that value is being passed into this other variable. Okay, so that we are not coding anything. All right, and so here is how we are constructing our config.php file. All right, so this is a PHP, all right, stuff, and of course this is what your config.php file looks like. And inside of that PHP file, we're going to be having the DB host, the DB name, the DB user, the DB pass. Now here, the DB host, the DB name, the DB user, we're also getting that from environment variable. But in case it is not available, all right, we are also, doing what you would call a failover. All right, so in case it's not able to get this value from the environment variable, then it can use all of these as what? As defaults. So the only place we don't have any defaults is the DB password, because we don't want to add code password in the configuration file. Is that okay? So you can see that all these are what? The variables that we defined in our compose file, which is what you have right here. Moodle DB host user name and all that. All right. And then, of course, the prefix for the table is MDL, and the root, all right, is also going to be fetched directly from the environment variable, which is Moodle www root, which is the URL that Moodle is going to be accessible on. And of course, as a failover as well, all right, we are putting, localhost right here. And of course, the data root, which is going to be the Moodle data, all right, we're specifying that as well. And of course, admin, that's like the default username, all right. And then the SSL proxy. Now, this SSL proxy is necessary to tell Moodle that it is being served, all right, from behind a proxy, all right, so that the SSL configuration can actually work and our Moodle LMS can actually leverage the SSL connection, all right, because if you don't put this here, now the front end is going to be rendered in a distorted format, and that's not what we want. So we want to tell Moodle that, hey, you're being served, all right, using SSL proxy, so that you are behind a proxy. All right, so understand that, be aware of that. Is that okay now? And that's what we're doing here. And after all that is done, we are saying, okay, Moodle PHP config created. And then, of course, if this condition is not true, then it can execute this else statement, which says, the Moodle config PHP exists, and then just go ahead. And of course, we want to run the Apache 2 in the foreground, which means it should be like at the forefront, the first thing that should be started. All right, so that's this Entrypoint script, and that's exactly what it is doing. All right, so we're leveraging this environment variable to do what? To construct that config.php script. All right, and then of course that will be bundled together by the time you build your image. All right, which I have already done anyways. Now, the next one here is the Moodle DB, all right, the database, which is going to be MySQL 8.4.5. Like I said, of course, there are newer versions, but I believe that it's better to go with a version that is stable, all right, current and stable, all right, instead of going with a newer, all right, version, which, might still have some bugs and all of that. Okay, then the container name, and then of course we have some environment variables here. And of course, if you go to your Docker Hub, you can find all this environment variable. If I look at my SQL, for example, and I click right here, all right, I should find, these are the images that you have available. If you scroll down here, you can see a lot of information, all right here. And of course, this is how you can use it in your compose file. So image MySQL, restart always, and then you have the environment right here. And of course, I think if you scroll down a bit, you'll find some more environment variables like root password, the database, the user, the MySQL password. All of these are variables that you can use, all right, with your MySQL database. So the root password, of course, we're getting that from a file as well. All right, and then that is db_root_password, which is what we have here. And then the database name, we're getting that also from environment variable. That's non-sensitive. All right. And then, of course, the user, and then, of course, the MySQL password file. So this MySQL password file here, it's basically the password for the database that we're creating. So here we're creating a database, we're creating a user, and then we're creating a password. So this password is going to be used by this user to access this database. Does that make sense? So that's what we have right here. And of course, we are also creating a named volume, all right, that we want to use here as well, called CloudDB. And then these are the two secrets that we're going to be using. And of course, you can see the files right here. Now, next up, we have the php_myadmin, so which is an image available in Docker Hub as well. And then restart always. It should restart in case it doesn't connect the first time. It should, all right, restart until it connects. And then, of course, your php_myadmin application is accessible on port 80, all right, by default. And of course, if you look at this database, let me just say one thing. We're not exposing any port. So that means it's going to be exposing the 3306 internally as well. So the database is not also going to be accessible directly from the internet. The only way to access will be to go through the PHP admin, all right, application to access, all right, the database. And so here we have the port 8080, which is the host port, and then 80 is the container port, right? Because your PHP admin also leverages Apache, all right, to serve its front end and all of that, all right? And then we have two environment variables here, PMA host, which is this one, which we can actually use variables for, by the way, all right? My SQL host, I believe that's the name, all right? So we can use a variable for that also, instead of putting the values here. So I think we can do that. So we're going to call that my SQL underscore host, all right? And of course, for the port as well, we can actually do another variable. So we're going to call that my SQL underscore port, and that will 3306, okay? So let's use the variable for all of these things, all right? So I'm going to remove that as well. So let's use the variable. All right, my SQL underscore port, okay? So we're using the variable for those ones, all right? Good. So now what we need here is just the host and the port. So, and the idea here is that this should give us like a login page where we'll have to log in, into the PHP admin in order to access it. Because here, if we specify the database, the password, and all those things, that means anybody that has your URL can access your PHP admin and yet access your database straight away. We don't want that. So what we want is that the PHP admin should give us a login page, and then we put in the credentials to log in. All right, so that way anybody who does not have the login cannot log in, all right, to the PHP admin and access, all right, our database. So we want to prevent that. And of course, this is also dependent on the Moodle DB as well, all right? And then here we also have the Nginx service, all right, and then we're using the image, we're using the latest image for this one, and then of course we have the depends on. So this depends on the Moodle app, right? So the Moodle app must have been started, and then the Nginx, all right, starts after the Moodle app, all right, has started. And then we have port here, port 8080, and then 443, all right, as well. So the reason why we are opening up 80 and all right 443 is because anybody who accesses our application on port 80, which is HTTP, the Nginx, all right, should redirect automatically, all right? So that way the Nginx will enforce, HTTPS by configuring redirection. Is that okay now? So that's the point of this. And then here we have another kind of volume, and this type of volume is what you call a bind mount. All right, bind mount, which means we are creating a directory on our system, all right, and then we are mapping that directory, all right, to a path inside of our container. So this bind mount is not automatically or directly managed by Docker. And the idea here is that host path that we have created, anything we manage inside of that host path becomes automatically available inside of that container path, which means if I modify any configuration here, automatically it appears here as well. So that way I won't have to rebuild the image. And this is useful for things like configuration files. All right, like your Nginx configuration files, all those kind of things that maybe you want to modify something, maybe you want to change the host name, you want to change the service name, all this kind of stuff that does not really require, all right, you rebuilding the image and all those kind of things, then you might want to consider a bind mount. All right, but the only drawback might be that if you delete that part on the host machine, right, it means that, that file is no longer available to the container. All right. And of course, if you edit that file inside of your container as well, it is also reflected, all right, in that file in the host system. So it's a two-way thing. Okay. So that is what you have right here. So it's a what? It's a bind mount. Okay. And of course, we are going to be using this same path for the Certbot as well. They can share the same thing, all right, the same, path. All right, the same bind amount, you can share that. And of course, for the Certbot, we also have this. So the purpose of the Certbot, again, is to generate, all right, SSL certificate for us automatically, all right? And this Certbot container is a container that will run once and then exit once the certificate generation has completed, all right? And that's exactly what we want. And the importance of putting the Certbot here as a service also is that if the certificate expires, all we would need to do is just to restart the Certbot service, and then it detect that the certificate has expired, and then it renews it automatically for us. And that's why we have it right here. Okay, so it's going to generate the SSL certificate, and do all of that, for us. And of course, we've put the URL there. So moodle.teachdev.online. So we've put the URL. So that's the domain that we intend to generate a certificate for. All right. So we put that right there. So, and of course, it's going to be access this and see that and see if it's accessible and all those kind of things, right? So we put that, and of course the email can be for the purpose of notification. Maybe the certificate is about to expire, or all those kind of things. We have to put the email, and then here also we are saying that this is not non-interactive, right? So it means just start the container, run the Certbot, SSL generation command, and then just do that for us, and we can check the logs once that is done. All right. Now, so all of the secret that we have used for the database and all, we have to define them globally here as well. All right. And of course, this is where we now put the correct path where the certificate, where the password, or the secret can be fetched. All right. We specify that right here. Okay. So you can see here that we're using this. So this is the name that we use, which is basically what we have here. And that refers to this, particular path. All right, so the secret, all right, and then the file. And then, of course, the volume, you have to also declare that globally as well, so that your Docker Compose can manage those volumes, all right, for us. Is that okay? So this is what we're going to be, running together. Now, before we go ahead, we need to create a few files. And of course, the first thing we need to do is to set up our EC2 instance, all right, and then we need to create this particular, folders, right, these 3 folders. We have to create, them as well. But first things first, having explained to us the compose file, I think it's nice now that we can go to the console, and then we can set up, our instance, okay? So I'm going to come here to launch instances. And so I'm just going to call this Moodle, or before I even launch the instance, all right, let's just go ahead. So Moodle Docker Compose, and of course I'm going to be leveraging Ubuntu for this. And one of the things that we would want to also do is that we want to make sure that we have Docker and AWS CLI installed on this server. All right, it has to be available, because if you don't have Docker installed on your server, how do you run the Docker Compose, right? So we need to make sure that we have those two. So here I'm going to leverage a T3 medium, basically to support the kind of traffic that we're expecting. For the key pair, I'm not going to be using the key pair because I want to be able to access my instance via SSM on the browser, all right? So I won't be using a key pair. For the VPC, I think I only have this one. So slotnet, I don't have any preference. Auto assign public IP, of course. Security group, I don't think I have anyone, but if I do have, it should show up here. But let's create a new one. So I'm just going to call this, Moodle Docker Compose -sg, and I'm going to copy that in the description as well. Now, for the purpose of what we want to do, SSH is not needed, but of course we do need HTTP port 80. And of course, I'm going to add another rule, and that will be 443 as well. All right. And we're opening these up because of the Certbot, right? So the Certbot can access the instance and do the validation before it issues the certificate. Is that okay? So I'm going to be leaving that as is. And here we can increase this to about 20 gig to have some space. And of course, here I should also associate, an IAM rule. Now, this IAM rule has these SSM instance managed core policy associated with it. And the purpose of that is to allow me to be able to connect to my instance using the session manager on the browser instead of using your regular SSH key. So I'm going to be selecting that. And of course, in order for us to make sure that this system has, Docker installed and all, I already have my shell script here. So this one. So all I'm going to do here is just to copy all of this. All right, and then I'll put that right here. So this will install Docker for us, Docker Compose, and of course AWS CLI. And right here, I'm also adding my SSM user, all right, to the Docker group, so that my SSM user can execute Docker commands as well. Is that okay now? And of course, I would launch my instance. All right. Oops. Sorry, we didn't configure the source. All right. So the source is going to be 00 for now. All right. So later on, we can tie that to our own IP, which we're going to do. So I'm going to launch the instance. So this is going to launch the instance, create a security group for us. All right. So the instance is coming up. And while that is coming up, we can go to security group and see what it has created. And so we can see the security group right here. So I'm going to copy this name. All right. Copy the name and of course make that available here as well. And so if you look at a security group, we can see here that the inbound rule, we have HTTP and HTTPS. And like I said, the purpose of this is to allow Certbot to do its validation. So I'm going to go back to my instance and come right here, grab the public IP. So copy the public IP, come to my domain, and I'm going to create a record. So the record I'm going to create in this terminal is going to be, all right, an A record, because we are pointing to an IP address, a public IP, not to another domain name. So if we're pointing to another domain name, that would be a CNAME record. But in this case, we're pointing directly to a public IP. So that's going to be, all right, an A record, all right? And here I'm going to basically say Moodle, all right, because it's going to be Moodle.teachdev.online. And that's what we have, all right, even in our compose file right here, right? Moodle.teachdev.online. Is that okay? So it's going to be an A record, and I'm going to just do 1 hour, and then I'm going to save this. So that way, all right, that IP is going to resolve to that name. And of course, locally, if I do, all right, ns lookup, and I do Moodle.teachdev.online, it should resolve, all right, to that IP. So you can see it's resolving to that IP, all right, address. So that means there's a connection. So the mapping has worked. Now we need to wait a little while, all right, for this instance to, all right, come up. So, we want to make sure that it's ready so that the Docker, the AWS CLI, everything can be installed. Okay. But while we're waiting for that, we can actually come here and then push some of those changes to our repo. All right, so I'm going to come here. I'm going to do a git commit. All right, and I'm going to say environment variable updated, environment variable and compose .yaml, all right, file updated. So I'm going to do that. And then we'll do, so we'll do a git push. All right, so that will push into the repo. So what we're going to do, right, is to clone that repository on our EC2 instance. That's what we want to do. So if I go back here to my repo and I do a little refresh, I should see that the repo has been updated just now, right? And of course, we can see the env file right here. Okay, so we can see all of the variables. And the beauty of using Docker secrets is that, we don't have any sensitive values here. These are nominal, all right, values, general values, right? So we're going to be creating our own secret file on the EC2 instance, all right? So that way, anybody that clones this repo will have to create their own secret and use that, right? And then, of course, they can leverage, the environment variable that we have right here. And if you take a look at the thing, everything is set up right here. All right. So the only thing that we're waiting for now is that the instance should be in the ready state. And I think it is. So we can come here and click on connect, and then click on session manager. And hopefully it's been registered with session manager, which is a good one. And then I'll come here and say connect. Now, this will open up the terminal for us in the browser. So it's way easier than, using SSH keys. And so if I want to check if the installation is completed, one of the fastest way to do that is by doing AWS version. All right. And it tells us AWS not found. Okay. So that can mean that it has not completed, all right, the installation. Okay, so we might need to wait a bit, for this installation to be complete. But if you're curious as to, what's going on, you can go to cd-var, all right, go to cd-var, and then if you do ls, you can do cd logs, all right, and then ls again. So this particular file here, cloud init, all right, output log, you can actually copy that and then, use that to check, all right, your user data installation, if it's completed, if it's still running, and all those kind of things, right? So I can do a cat, and I need a sudo, so sudo cat, all right, and then the file. So I can cut it to check the logs to see if everything has been installed. So I can come right here and I can see that there is really some installation going on here. If I look at it here, of course, I can see the sudo apt update. All right, I can see the SCD changing the HTTP in the sources list to HTTPS, and I can see some update happening right here, and I can see that indeed, some Docker stuff were going on here as well. All right, I can see the sudo apt install, Docker. All right, so I can see that actually it installed Docker for us. And here, I can see that the AWS CLI has not been installed. All right, so here user mode user SSM-user does not exist. All right, so it gave us, that error. Sudo user mode SSM user does not exist, so that kind of failed. Okay, so we can do the sudo cat again to see if it's still running anything, all right, behind the scenes. So let's do sudo cat again. Let's cut the file again, and let's see if anything is still running. Okay, so nothing is running, so that means it has not installed the AWS, all right, CLI. It has not done that. Okay, and that's because maybe because it was a startup script, so you didn't see the SM user. But really, the SM user does exist, all right, but then it was a startup script. Maybe by the time the system is starting up, maybe that is when it creates the SM user, maybe, all right, because if I go to CD, if I do CD home/SSM-user, all right, I didn't get any error. And if I do PWD, there's a user by that name actually. And if I do ID SSM, all right, user, I can see that there is actually a user by that name. All right. So it might be that when the system is starting up, maybe that's when it creates the user. All right. And then we are trying to now use the user that has not been created as at the time the user data script is running. Is that okay? So that's why it's possible that we got this, all right, particular error. Is that okay now? Because right now, if I do sudo, if I run the same command again and I do sudo user mode, all right, -ag, all right, Docker, and then SSM-user, all right, I shouldn't get any error. Can you see that? And then if I do ID SSM-user now, all right, I should see that that user has actually been added to the Docker group. So like I said, it might be that the user has not been created as at the time the user data scripts, all right, ran. Okay. So again, let's do sudo cat again. Let's see, all right, if I think we're in the home directory now, so we can do sudo cat, all right, varlog / so let's do that again, and then let's see the logs. All right, so we can see here that it really didn't install, all right, the AWS CLI. So for some reason, I guess it failed around here. All right, run Moodle user script, blah, blah, blah. All right, so data source. So for some reason, it didn't go past, all right, this stage. Okay, so let's basically just do that. So that's some kind of lesson for us there. Literally, I can just copy this whole script and then create a script. I can just call that nano docker.sh. So I can create that, paste the whole script here, and then save this. And literally, I don't have to do sudo chmod +x. I can just basically say batch docker sh, and that should run the script for us, all right, automatically. So now let's see what we're going to have here. All right, so now the AWS CLI should install. All right, so now it's installing the AWS CLI. So I guess that user error was what stopped the whole thing, right, from running. So now if I do version, all right, I can see now that I have my AWS CLI, all right, installed. So I hope that, little troubleshooting and things that we discussed now, I hope you understand that. So I'm going to exit this. all right, so that I would connect to my instance again, so that I can use my SSM user to connect to my, all right, Docker, all right, daemon. Okay. So now if I do Docker PS, I can see that my user, it's been able to do that. And of course, if I do who am I, or think it's who, all right, am I, all right, so I can see I'm SSM user, right? But let's go into the SSM user, all right, home directory, okay? So let's go there. So now the first thing I want to do is that, remember, we've pushed these old, thing into our repository, right? So I'm going to go to my repo, and right here, I'm going to come back to code, and I'm going to come here and grab the HTTPS endpoint. It's a public repo, so we don't need any kind of authentication. So I'm going to copy that and then come here, and I'm going to do, all right, a git clone. So let's clone the repo locally. All right, so that will clone the repo. So we have the repo cloned. So if I do cd Moodle -docker -compose, all right, we have all of the files right here. Okay, now one of the files that I didn't talk about was, these two files, the HTTP conf. We're going to be needing this two. So here, it's basically the reverse proxy configuration for our, all right, Nginx. Okay, first of all, we're going to be running this one to allow Nginx to serve, all right, our Moodle LMS via the HTTP, and then once we are sure that the certificate has been issued, we will now revert back to this one. Okay, so this one is the one that will now do the redirection, all right, and then we basically connect the certificate to it, to the path, and all of that, right? So we're going to be starting with this one. Okay, so first things first, we want to create, all right, secrets. So let's do that. So here, I'm going to create a folder, mkdir, and then I'll call that secret. I think that's the name here as well. All right, so inside of the secrets folder, I'm going to cd into them, cd secret, all right, ls. So I'm going to be creating, the name of the first file is db_password.txt. So let's create that nano. All right, or we can actually do an echo, right? So we can do echo. So I can say echo. So let's just generate something random, right? So what can be the secret? So I can just put, all right, so something random, just to, okay. So echo, and then we're going to be echoing this into db_password.txt. Okay. So now if I do ls, I should have db_password, all right, .txt. So I have that. And of course, if we cut that, db_password.txt, all right, we can see that content right there. So we can do the same thing for the other one. So echo, we can generate something random again, all right, just to make it a bit difficult, right? So, and then db_root_password.txt. I think we got the name correctly. All right. And then we would, all right, create that as well. So now if I do cat db_root_password.txt, all right, we can see the content of the file as well. Okay, so that is done. So we can come out of the secret folder now. The next thing that we want to do is that we want to create some directories, right? So I'm going to say -p. And so one of the directories we want to create is what we can see here. So if I go to my compose again, I can see that I need to create this Nginx config. All right, so I'm going to create Nginx, all right, /confd. All right, so we need to create that. Okay, and then I need to create let encrypt as well. Okay, and then we also need to create the Nginx HTML. All right, Nginx/HTML. Okay, all right, so these are the three directories that we need, all right, to create. Okay, so let's encrypt. All right, so create that. So if I do ls, I should find the directories, all right, created. So let's encrypt Nginx and then this other one. So if we do ls Nginx, so we have the config D. Okay. Okay, so oops, I think I misspelled the names. So let's recreate that again. So I think there was a mistake I made. So copy that, because we're not supposed to have two folders. Consider the name is not the same. So let's recreate. So this should be, oops, forgotten I can't use backspace. So this should be Nginx, all right, /html. All right. So if I do ls, we should have, so if I do ls Nginx now, all right, so we have the config D and then we have the HTML. So I can actually remove, all right, that other one. So the other one with Nginx. Okay, so we can remove that. All right, so we have that sorted out. So the first thing I want to do is I'm going to copy this, all right, this particular http.conf, or since I already have it right here, I can just move that, right? So I'm going to move http, all right, .conf to nginx, all right, /config.d. Okay, so I'm going to move that there, right? All right, so now if I do ls, the http conf is gone, so I can do ls nginx /conf.d, right? I can see that I have my http.conf right in that, all right, location. So that is sorted, all right? So now we have everything that we need, okay? So what we just have to do now is to run our compose file, all right? So that's what we need to do. The image has been built, the config file has been, done, everything has been proved. So we can cut our compose.yml file to basically see what we have and be sure that we're ready to roll. So we have everything here sorted, all right? So we have port 80 opened up. We have port 8080 for PHP admin is not opened up yet, so we might have to, all right, open that up. 443 is opened up, all right? So we have all of these things available, right? So I can go to my security group to just basically make sure that port 8080 is available as well. All right, so I can click here, go to my inbound, and then edit inbound. And right here, it's going to be custom. So for now, let's just say 8080 from anywhere. So I'm going to do that and then save the root. So guys, I think we're good to go now to run, all right, the compose file. So are we ready? All right, so once again, these are the files we have. Configuration has been done, so we're ready to roll. Okay, so I'm basically going to say docker compose up-d. Now, the reason why I'm saying docker compose up-d is because my compose.yml, it's the standard name, so I don't have to specify the name. And of course, the environment variable is .env, so docker compose will also pick that up automatically as well. And if I want to be sure the env is there, I can do ls-la, and right here I can see that I have my .env indeed, right? So now I can just say docker compose, all right, up-d. So that would detect the compose.yaml file, and then of course pick up the .env file as well, all right, and use that for us automatically. And we've created a secret, all right, folder also, so it's going to basically use that. So let's press enter. All right, so here service engineer depends on undefined service Moodle app, invalid compose project. All right, so we're having to deal with some things here. So the Nginx service depends on the Moodle app service that is not valid, right? So let's do nano compose.yml. So let's troubleshoot that. All right, so the name of the service here is Moodle, all right, not Moodle app. So we can actually, correct that, right? So Moodle app, okay? So let's correct that. So what other things that do we have here? So let's take a look at what other thing that we might have, because everything should be consistent, okay? All right, so I think we're good. So let's save again, and then let's run it again. So docker compose up-d. So let's see. All right, so it's pulling right now. So let's wait for these to complete the pulling. So you can see all the images have been pulled now. Let's see what we are likely to get. All right. After all the images have been pulled. You can see here from the image that the Moodle app, it's quite heavy, about 1.6 gig or something. So it's quite a heavy. Okay. All right. So Certbot pulled, Nginx pulled. Okay. So let's just wait for that. Still running. All right. The PHP admin has been pulled as well. So we're left with the Moodle. All right, the Moodle DB has been pulled. All right, so we're waiting for the Moodle, all right, app, which is our own image that we built ourselves. So that's what we're waiting for to be pulled. So let's see what this will give us. All right. So you can see here that, I mean, everything got pulled completely and then the containers have been started. So now let's do Docker PS. Let's see the containers that we have. So we can see that we have the Certbot container, trying to run. The Nginx is also running. The Certbot should exit any moment from now. Once the certificate has been created, it will exit automatically. All right. And then, of course, we can see our app. We can see that it's been opened up, all right, on port 80 internally. And of course, our PHP admin is accessible from outside. And MySQL is also being opened up internally, all right, as well. Okay, so let's do Docker PS again. All right, so now we can see that the Certbot is no longer there, but we can actually check the logs to see if indeed the certificate was generated successfully. So we can do Docker logs. All right, Certbot. All right, so that's the name. So let's see, requesting certificate. All right, good. So look at what we have. So saving this account registered, requesting certificate for this, successfully received certificate. Certificate is saved at this location. All right, you can see those two locations. So the full chain and the private key is saved here, and the certificate will expire so and so. These files will be updated when the certificate renews. Next step, certificate will be renewed before it expires. So you can see that. Now, let's say that I want to renew the certificate and say, let's say the certificate has expired and all that. All I need to do would just be to say Docker compose. All right, I'm just going to do a restart. And then I'll say Certbot. That's the name of the service. Now it's going to restart that Certbot. Now let's see what's going to happen. So if I do Docker PS, the Certbot, all right, can we find it here? It's not there. Okay. Now if I do Docker logs, all right, Certbot again. Now look at what it says here. It says, I mean, it's still giving us the same, all right, thing. But then look at what it says. Certificate not yet due for renewal. And it says what? No action taken. Can you see that? No action taken. So that means if certificate is due for renewal, right, and I do that restart, it's going to automatically renew the certificate for us. So that makes things, all right, easy. Is that okay now? All right. So now, if we go over to the let's do Docker PS again. So now, if I look at the logs for my application here, so let's look at the logs. We want to see if the config.php file was generated automatically. So I can do Docker logs, all right, and then the name of the container is Moodle, right? So let's look at it. So you can see here it says generating Moodle config.php, and it says Moodle config.php, all right, created. We can see that, right? So that's exactly what I wanted us to see. Is that okay? All right. So now we have the Moodle application has started. The Nginx, all right, has also started. Okay. So if I do Docker logs, all right, Nginx, the name of that is Nginx proxy. That's the name of the container. All right. So we can see that the Nginx is also, all right, started as well. All right. But now that we have the certificate, all right, issued, all right, now that we have it issued, we can actually remove the HTTP config and replace that with the HTTPS config, right? So we can replace this one that we've used and replace that with this one, right? Which has all the configurations settled for us already. Okay, so we can do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do rm-rf, and then we're going to go into nginx / all right, conf.d, all right, and we're going to /http.conf, right? So we're going to remove that. And then we're going to move the new HTTPS, all right, .conf, all right, and then we're going to move that to nginx/conf.d, all right, / right? So we're going to move it there. And so if I do ls nginx, all right, /conf.d, okay, I can see now that I have the nginx, right? So now what I can do is just to say docker compose, all right, restart, all right, Nginx. So basically restart the Nginx service so that it can now use the proper, all right, config file. So I'm going to restart that. And now if I do docker ps, my Nginx has been restarted 2 seconds ago. So if I do docker logs now, and then Nginx proxy, right? Okay, so I can see now that it has started. All right, and of course, it's not empty, blah, blah, blah. So it started already. And we can see that, I mean, everything is good to go. So what do we do? So now we can access our container. So all I need to do is to come here and then do moodle.teach dev.online. And that should, all right, serve our application. Okay, so let's see what we have. Now, look at the page it brought us to. So here, it didn't take us to the usual install.php page, right? Because we've configured the database credentials. I mean, we've done all of that, right? So it just took us straight to the space, which is what we want to achieve, right? So instead of putting a database name, the database password, I mean, all those kind of things, we've generated a config file, we've done all of that, and then it takes us right here. And of course, it is using the SSL certificate, all right, correctly as we intend. Okay. And of course, if I come over here to Moodle, all right, .teach dev.online, and I do column 8080, which is for our PHP admin, even though the certificate does not cover that because of the, port number, we can see here that now it brought us to the login page. So if you don't know the login, sorry, you can't log in into this. So it gave us the login page. So we have to authenticate before we can actually, all right, use this. Okay, so this is the login page. So right here, I can come here, say continue. All right, and that will basically just give us the server check page. And if I scroll down, it says your server environment meets all requirements. We can see that because we're using HTTPS, Moodle is saying it correctly. The configuration is super okay. So if I click on continue, it basically will just go ahead and then do the installation. So I don't have to manually put all the username for database and all that. And of course here, I can log in. So the Moodle user, we can get that information even from the server. So from here, we can look at the secrets. So we can do, all right, cat secrets slash, so we can even cut the env first, right? So env, so cat that'll be .env, right? So the username is Moodle user, so that's the username. We have to get a password, right? So the username is this. So for the password, we have to get that from, so we have to do a cat into secrets /db underscore password.txt, right? So I think this should be the correct secrets. I can copy that. All right, so we can copy that, put a password here, and then do a login. So if that's correct, then we're able to log in. And of course, if I click on the database, which is already there, I can see that the database is being populated already because, I mean, the Moodle installation is ongoing. So you can see the database is being populated almost about 250 tables. All right, so that's what I wanted to show us, all right, in today's video. And of course, if you want to look at if you want to log in into your Docker, your Moodle Docker image or container to see the config file, you can actually do a Docker exec, all right, -it, and the name I think is Moodle, and then .sh, right? And then if you do ls, it takes you to this page. And if you do cat config.php, now you can see that the password, all right, was substituted correctly for the database. All right, even though all of these ones still remains, get environment variable and all that, I mean, the password was substituted correctly. And of course, we can see that all the other environment variable worked as well, because if the environment variable were not fetched properly, all right, we will not be able to access our Moodle, all right, from the URL. Okay, so that tells us that yes, indeed, all the environment variable was substituted correctly, and of course we have our Moodle, all right, installed, and we can see the page. And the most important thing is the Moodle is secure, and with Docker Compose, we've seen that we can actually just automate the renewal of the SSL certificate, and that's pretty much all that we needed to do. All right. So thank you so much, guys. I believe that this session has been packed with a lot of insight. I believe you learned significant, knowledge here again. Thank you. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, and of course, comment as well, because your comment, helps us to get better, helps us to do better. I mean, somebody made a comment on one of my Docker page, one of the Docker videos that I made about, secrets being only available for Docker Swarm, and the person corrected that impression, and then I felt, okay, that's a good one. And then I came up with this video to basically show that indeed you can actually use Docker Compose secret, all right, as well, even for Docker Compose, not just for Swarm, all right, alone. So please comment, like, share, and subscribe. Until I come your way again, thank you, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye for now.